Good morning, good people. I'm Apostle T.B. Walker. Listen, I want to read something to you out of 2 John, chapter number 1, verses 10 through 11. Here's what it says. It says that if there come any unto you and bring not this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him Godspeed. For he that biddeth him Godspeed is a partaker of his evil deeds. Now, you know what? I want you to look at that because, John is saying, listen, do not give evil a platform. Do not give false doctrines a platform. And there's a severity in these words that you're hearing right now that can make us a little uncomfortable, right? It can give us a little pause. This is not the view that we generally have of Christianity. When we look at that, it's a wide open arm. It's inclusive, right? It deals with the idea of whosoever will, let him come, right? The church being made up of all nations and tongues. So this seems like it's a little intrusive or exclusive. But John said this, right? He says, receive him not. Don't welcome him. Don't even give him a greeting that communicates any approval of what he's done. Now, we have to understand why John is actually warning against these believers that are coming, these unbelievers, these false teachers that are coming in. Now, like, if we misunderstand this passage, what we can do is turn Christianity into isolation, right? We'll turn it into suspicion and hostility, and that's all it'll be about, right? And it'll be hostile toward everybody who doesn't believe like we believe. John's not telling Christians, I want you to stop talking to unbelievers. Nothing like that. He's telling Christians to stop partnering with deception. And that distinction is critical. It's super critical in our time. Jesus himself ate with sinners, right? We recognize that. He spoke with Samaritans. He conversed with people outside of the covenant community. We recognize that. Paul himself reasoned with the Greeks day and night, right? He talked with philosophers. He talked with various Jews. He talked with unbelievers. Paul was mighty with the Gentiles. So this was radical. But so Paul realized the gospel is not advanced by us hiding from the world. The gospel is not advanced by us somehow just becoming an island unto ourselves. But we have to understand there's a dramatic difference between engaging someone with the gospel and endorsing someone who's corrupting the gospel. John's addressing people who are actively teaching different doctrine about Jesus Christ. It's happening right in front of us. It's happening all over. And so many of us have our mouths closed. Listen, when you look at the letter earlier, John says he's warning about people who deny that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. He says these are not simply people who haven't come around yet. They just haven't believed yet. They haven't been drawn by the mighty hand of God. No, these are teachers of error, and they're seeking to influence believers. That's why they come in among the believers. These people with these damnable heresies have crept in unaware. That's why the warning is so strong. The issue here is not conversion. The issue here is identification. John says, whoever gives this false teacher a welcome, and whoever gives them a blessing becomes a partaker of their evil deeds. And that word partaker is so important. I want you to put your finger there because John's talking about that you may not be the one who's preaching. You may not be the one who's giving out the erroneous doctrine. You may not be the one who's passing out the flyers. You may not be the one who's doing any of the marketing. But if you knowingly provide a platform, if you knowingly add an endorsement or resources to someone who's preaching a doctrine that is against the word of God, I can tell you right now, John says you are a participant. You are now participating in what that person is doing. You don't have to preach the error to spread the error. And that's important. And that's relevant for us today. Listen, we live in a culture right now where access is influence. So a platform can legitimize a person. That's why it's important who you allow on your platforms. An invitation can communicate that you are endorsing that person, even though their doctrine is not the same doctrine that you preach. And Paul said, listen, let him be accursed. Anybody who brings any other doctrine other than this, you give them a microphone, and a microphone can communicate credibility. Right? If you publicly associate with certain people, listen, I can tell you what it does. There are other Christians who are looking at you. right? They're seeing your strength and they're saying, listen, if a Christian brother or sister like them can actually comfortably hang out with this brother, even though we all know what he said, we all know what he believes, we all know what happened, we all know what he did. And this is not about judgment. This is about erroneous doctrine that is intentionally spread to trip up the believer. Listen, if you're okay with it, there are other people who are looking at you who respect you, who say, listen, then the teaching must be acceptable. See, we don't want to be that guy. We want to be the kumbaya. We want these wide open arms that will accept anything. Listen, God's arms are open wide, but he does not accept anything, right? He doesn't just take anything. Listen, you cannot deny that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. You can't deny that Jesus Christ is Lord. You can't deny that he's his only begotten son. You can't deny that he's the only way to salvation and be a believer. So John says, listen, I want you to be careful with what you welcome, with how you welcome, because your welcome communicates something. The people you hang with, the people you're around, the people you spend time with, it communicates something and it gives an endorsement. So when Paul talks about this, he's not saying, listen, you can't speak to people who are of other faiths, right? I don't want you around unbelievers. He's not saying that. Listen, when you read this, we cannot read this chapter, chapter number 2, this John 2, by saying, John is saying, don't talk to people who don't believe what you believe. That's not what it's about. Listen, if that's what John was actually saying, I can tell you right now, evangelism would be impossible. The issue here is not contact, it's complicity. That you are not to be complicit. Listen, you can listen respectfully to people without affirming what contradicts scripture. You don't have to be rude, right? You don't have to raise your hand and interrupt. But now what you have to do is understand that in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, right? Paul says, if we were required to avoid immoral people altogether, we would have to leave the world. The Christian isn't called to leave the world, right? We don't go on another planet. We don't make a planet in our own homes. We don't cloister ourselves together in our little small Christian community and never peep our heads out. That's not what it's about. We're called to live in the world without being governed by the world's understanding of what is true. That's exactly what the believer is called to do. And that's the balance that we live, to be in the world, but not of the world. So Jesus was close to sinners, right? He had plenty of time to be around them, and he was close enough to reach them. But he was never close enough to sin that he became compromised by it. You never saw that. So when John comes in, he says, receive him not. I want you to understand, in the first century, right, the traveling teachers were very dependent upon the hospitality of believers. So a Christian home could become a place where a teacher would be housed, would be fed, right? They would get the news of the community. They'd be supported and they'd be introduced around the Christian community to other Christians. So what John is actually saying, listen, don't turn your Christian fellowship into a distribution center for false doctrine. Because you want to be kind, because you think that you want to get along and go along. You don't want to be the person who just stirs up the boat. We'll let God change their heart. I don't want to say anything. Listen, you have to become discerning without being hateful. We don't have to be hateful. The fact that we don't agree, the fact that that's not true, the fact that we know that that's a lie doesn't mean we have to be hateful. Some Christians have confused love with agreement. Listen, if I love you, I'm just going to nod my head in agreement. But listen, biblical love does not require us to affirm everything somebody believes. If I love you, it doesn't mean I believe everything you believe. And some people have looked at doctrinal conversion as hostility. We develop this anger with the world, this them and us. But biblical truth does not require us to treat people as enemies. They're not enemies simply because they're wrong. Because they're in error does not mean they're wrong. We can say, listen, I love you without saying I agree with you. That's not a necessity. There's some things that we need to stand on and that we need the world to know we stand on. We can respect somebody without saying your doctrine is true. I can still have respect for you and be able to say, no, that is not true. I know it's not true because the word says this. Because ultimately, John's warning about the value of truth. What's the value of truth? You begin to look here and you can see how we're looking at the stock market and how we're looking at crypto, and the value of things and the value of a dollar and how it's changing and how much it costs out here to do just the smallest things. And so value is what we deal with every day, but we don't deal with the value of truth. What is it? What is it? How valuable is it for you to stand on what you believe is right because the word says it? Listen, our generation desperately needs to recover, right? We got to recover because we think that truth is in the eye of the beholder. And we give a platform to everything. And we have to understand everything doesn't deserve a platform simply because it deserves a conversation. Because there's a conversation that needs to be had does not mean we need to put that out there. We don't need to give room. We don't need to give place to the devil. Everybody needs to hear the gospel. We know that. But everybody doesn't need to have access to God's people as teachers of the gospel. And preachers need to be careful. Because they have a following doesn't mean that they're following Christ. Because they're popular with people does not mean that they're okay with God. Everybody deserves love, right? But everybody is not meant to get your endorsement. Listen, you can engage with people, but you don't need to empower lies. You don't need to empower people or help people who are out there lying, who are leading people astray. And the church has to know the difference. So the final lesson, as we sum this up, is that we need to guard the gospel without closing our hearts off to people, right? Part of the reason why John is actually saying this, listen, I don't want you with them because I don't want them tainting your witness. He never says, listen, I want you to dislike them. I want you to hate them. We don't build walls around Christianity that are meant to prevent unbelievers from hearing Christ. That's not what it's about. We tear down walls. That's what we do. We knock down walls so people can hear the gospel. But we have to use discernment so that anything that enters the church cannot come in and redefine Christ. That's what the enemy is trying to do in this last day. The enemy is trying to come in like a wolf in sheep's clothing, coming with another Christ. And when you'll watch it today, the churches are not going to just implode. Churches are not just shutting down. Churches are growing. And there are places where churches are becoming popular. And I'll tell you why. There is another Christ in so many places. There's a social Christ and a political Christ. Not the Christ of the Bible. Not a Christ that even can do miracles. Not a Christ that is in charge over all things. But a Christ who's just like me and you. Weak and fallible, just like me and you. A Christ that people can get their arms around. A Christ who can hate. A Christ who can regret. A Christ who can be in need. Just like me and you. So you have to understand something. People are believing in a false Christ. They're not going out there. It's not about joining a cult. It's not about going out there and worshiping an idol. They're worshiping a Christ that was created by the itching ears of man. Listen, Jesus is sending us into the world, but he's not sending us into the world so that we become like the world. Listen, John, this 10 and 11, it's not a command for us to isolate ourselves from unbelievers. And I want you to grasp that. In partnership. They're destructive. They're negative. They've come to kill, steal, and to destroy. But God says for you to stand still and to see the salvation of the Lord, but to be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have. We are defenders of the faith. It's time to get busy. Everybody else is standing up and shouting their lies. It's time we shouted the truth. I want you to receive that today. It's radical. It's a different way of thinking, but it's understanding why we're here. We're not just pew sitters. We're not just here to occupy space. We're not just here to shout about our membership. We're not just here to go to the same old revival again and again. It's about going out into the highways and byways and being able to see what God can do through you. Listen, let's get radical. This is your time. God bless you. Have an awesome rest of your Sunday.